Hi, and a warm welcome to our Takten Summit, Conscious Manufacturing. My name is Cecilia Hamrin, and I will be the host for our summit this spring. Let's get started. And our first keynote speaker today is Jo Sullivan. She's a highly experienced sustainability diplomat and strategic communication advisor. Jo advises businesses, NGOs, and European Commission clients on advocacy and strategic communication. And Jo is also a professor of climate diplomacy at the European Institute in Nice. So happy to have you here with us, Jo, and a warm welcome to our virtual stage. And I'm super excited to hear your presentation on making sustainable products the norm. So I will hand over the word to you, Jo, and whenever you're ready, feel comfortable to get started.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you all today. I'm going to share with you some insights from the Brussels bubble. That's the EU policymakers. How the policy, how the regulation is going to affect the manufacturing sector. So with resource scarcity on everybody's mind and climate and circularity imperatives, making manufacturing sustainability, it matters for every sector. So how do we make sustainable products the norm? That's the question today. And how do we step closer to conscious manufacturing? So let me start by saying this. It's a tough message, but in a world of geopolitical risks, business is no longer as usual. It's time to think outside the box. It's time to innovate. You know your customers and you know the market trends. People want sustainable products and our planet needs sustainable production. The trends for global heating, resource depletion, waste and pollution are simply unsustainable. And policymakers recognize this, and that's why EU regulation is on its way. Like it or not, you're going to be subject, whatever part of the manufacturing chain you're in, you're going to be subject to more regulation. And this will affect every manufacturing company in Europe, but also around the world by consequence. None of us can predict what massive changes are on the horizon. These last years have shown that. But what we do know is change is inevitable, that shocks are no longer unusual, and that we all have to prepare ourselves and our organizations to thrive in a volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous world. So let's fasten our safety belts and start to prepare for the brave new world. Here's my next slide coming up. You may recognize these. These are the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the UN back in the day. And we're today going to focus on number 12. You'll see that on the middle row on the right-hand side. It's the global ambition of all UN member countries, that's most of the countries in the world, to achieve these goals, to achieve systems change in all of these areas by 2030. So the focus today is on responsible consumption and production. In other words, manufacturing. So here on this slide, you'll see the link at the bottom between the UN goals and the way the European Commission and European policymakers see the circle of resource use, manufacturing, the production and consumption cycle. And there at the top, you see how we in our daily lives are affected or enjoy these kind of products as consumers, but also as public authorities who purchase lifts, who purchase trucks, who design whole power stations. Public procurement rules are going to be bound by sustainability criteria in the future. So this is something for every sector, not just consumer products, but also all the kind of manufacturing, the big machinery, which is essential to the functioning of the European economy. So EU policymakers do believe, as you see the centre circle here, well, this is a download from the EU website, from the European Commission website, you see they do believe that manufacturers can shape and build a more sustainable future. You're playing the central role now. Last year, it was about the food and farming system. This year, it's all about sustainable manufacturing. So you are at centre stage in the policymakers' minds. How do they shift from a linear economy where we get resources, we extract resources, we make them into things, we sell them, they're used, and we throw the parts away? How do we transform from that linear economy to a circular economy where there is no such thing as waste, where manufacturers are responsible for every raw material that's used in their production process, to re-enable its use or to repurpose it or to make sure that the materials are recycled. It's all about circularity, as you see. So the manufacturing process, what's really focused on here is this idea of the left-hand side is about eco-design. We want to actually, or policymakers want to reach the point where the circular economy is such that resources, there is no such thing as waste, and that resources are actually inputted in such a way that products are designed according to what you may have heard of already, or may be using this concept already of eco-design. So now there's going to be an increased emphasis on repair and upgrades to reduce the end-of-life impact and to improve recyclability. The second point, because there's three ideas here. The first is eco-design. The second is material-specific recycling targets. Imagine all the materials that are used in the processes that you may be responsible for. Each of them will have a recycling target set by the European Commission. That means there will be pressure all down and up supply chains to reduce the material impact and to improve sufficiency. And sufficiency has become a real hot topic since the geopolitics has changed. So there's much more pressure on sourcing locally and so forth. That's become part of the equation, not just for ecology, but also for security of supply. And the third thing I'd focus on is the extended producer responsibility, which is essentially making manufacturers responsible for the end of life of their products and for all of the materials within them. Okay, so there we are. So we have eco-design, we have material-specific recycling targets. These are all these things that you have to bear in mind, and extended producer responsibility. And so we have to bear in mind that there are real challenges. The three concepts means that when we're configuring products, sustainability will take more of a center stage, and that's the point. In a system circular approach versus a linear economic approach. So the next slide. So looking at this is about the climate impact of the manufacturing sector and the significant greenhouse gas emissions of the products in the process. 1/4 of all emissions come from manufacturing. Now that's a lot. It's clear that achieving climate goals and net zero emissions requires action across all sectors and all systems. Energy we know about, the shift to electrification and renewables, transport, food, but especially production and consumption. And a couple of other key data points. Half of global greenhouse gas and 90% of biodiversity losses are caused by extraction and processing primary raw materials. If we just look at that data, that's just no longer sustainable in the world we live in. So on top of that, resource depletion, high levels of emissions and pollution, and so rapid and radical restructuring of global economic, energy, food, manufacturing and transportation systems is happening. So it's not just a question of having to act, but you have to act quickly and to totally transform production and consumption patterns. Let's just shift to this now. So why is a circular economy needed? Look at this data here. So by 2050, the world population will consume resources at a rate 3 times higher than the Earth can replenish. Global consumption of materials such as fossil fuels, metals, and minerals is expected to double by 2060. The annual waste generation is projected to increase by 70% by 2050. Production, consumption, and waste linked to products are responsible for 40% of global greenhouse emissions. So let's think about how do we retain these materials in the economy through high levels of reuse, recycling, and circular designs. This is why this project is needed, and that's why the EU has started to regulate in this area. Now let's have a look at the data when we do, this is a survey of global sustainability leaders. What are the top issues in people's minds? It's about climate change. We know that's about emissions, about energy efficiency. We know it's also about circularity, because the more waste there is in the production cycle, the more greenhouse gas emissions are produced. And it's also about biodiversity loss, mostly caused by extraction and land use changes. Now I wanted to show you this because this is the source of the complexity in a way. Sustainability is happening. It's going to disrupt manufacturing sector, and it's time to be ready. And the European Green Deal is the EU policy framework within which, if you see just on the left-hand side here, the third one down on the left, it's about a big part of it is about mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy. And if we look here, all of the EU policy is based on a thorough analysis. So we won't expect rules which won't be implemented. We will expect regulation which has been carefully thought through. It will deal with intersectionalities between climate and low carbon and circularity. And it'll be hitting the desks of European policymakers anytime soon because it's just been announced by the European Commission. And this slide is to show how the European Commission sees this massive transformation that's going on. Key actions for circular and sustainable products. It's about making products greener, circular and energy efficient through eco-design. That's a key word to remember. It's already in place now, but it's having a massive eco-design 2.0, a massive upgrade. Products will have to have environmental information attached to them in their whole chain through consumption, production, and back into production again. So that means that there will be something which is called a product passport, information passport, a digital product passport, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. It's about preventing destruction. Obviously, in certain consumer goods areas, that's become a real issue. And food and clothes have been destroyed when they, to retain a kind of level of scarcity and value. Business models are going to have to change, and that's something for you all to bear in mind. And this important point on the end, green public procurement. What does that mean? It means that public authorities, municipalities, national governments will have criteria established to embed green public procurement into the system. So it's no longer a case about what's cheap and what's quick. It'll be also a question about how sustainable that is. And of course, depending on which country you live in, some countries will try and be more sustainable than others, and some will, and some companies will also meet that challenge and try and be more sustainable than their competitors in being able to be kind of future ready to be able to respond to the green public procurement. Whoops, this seems to have moved around a little bit, the title. Don't know why that has done that, but I'm reading it in a slightly strange way. I just want to talk about this. This is the main proposal for a regulation on eco-design for sustainable products. So it's all about eco-design. Product design determines 80% of a product's lifestyle environmental impact. So if you don't get the design right at the beginning, then there's clearly going to be a less than optimum environmental impact. This new regulation will set requirements to make products more durable, reliable, reusable, upgradable, repairable, easier to maintain, refurbish and recycle, and energy and resource efficient. All of that means massive systems change. As I say, shifting from linear to circular is complicated, but now there's another layer on top of that, and it's about making sure that there is no waste, that all waste becomes an input. And that's a real challenge for many sectors. Product-specific information requirements will ensure customers know the environmental impacts of their purchases, and all regulated products, which is probably 98% of products which will be put on the market, will have digital product passports to make it easier to repair or recycle products and facilitate tracking. And of course, then there are going to be additional measures, which I won't get into today. This is a whole raft of measures, but there are going to be additional measures to end the destruction of unsold consumer goods, to expand green public procurement, as I've mentioned, and also to incentivize sustainable production through various tax mechanisms and sustainable finance mechanisms, which we may have a little chance to talk about later. But for the purposes of just giving you a little overview now, how will this impact you as manufacturers? So there are opportunities clearly for collaboration, configuration, and innovation. I mean, these are the three key words in remanufacturing, maintenance, recycling, and repair. this idea that you make the manufacturers make a product and it just goes out there, there's a responsibility of end-of-life use, of extended producer responsibility to make sure that there is no waste, that there is somehow a responsibility, and that will be mandated through EU law to actually recover the materials that are used. So the Commission will progressively set requirements. This will happen during the course of the next 1 or 2 years for each group or product, each product or group of products. And they will cover the broadest range of products, as I mentioned, like some 98% of products which are put on the market, and products meaning the biggest definition of products. And that would include criteria for energy efficiency. What does energy efficiency mean? Criteria for circularity, and criteria to reduce environmental and climate footprints of products. And so what are the opportunities? You can see this, your business guys, right? You can embrace sustainability early on to mitigate disruption and have that kind of early lead advantage. You can make cost savings from more sustainable products, and not just cost savings for yourself, but your consumers, your customers down the chain. Everybody wants to save money in today's economy. There are reputational benefits for your companies as product quality increases, quality defined by this idea of a zero waste economy. And competitiveness will increase. And importantly, those of you who are global manufacturers, once set, the rules will apply equally to all products placed on the EU market. So regardless of origin, whether they're made inside or outside the EU. So that's a really significant point, and that's a kind of alignment, a Green Deal with the idea of Europe and European trade, which is quite a novel approach for the European Commission. Okay, I just want to say here, this is like a quote from the European Commissioner for Internal Market, and the point here, and this is when this big package of measures was announced on the 30th of March, the regulations just mentioned before. It's all about sustainability, resource efficiency. It means resilience when a crisis disrupts our industrial supply chains. You all know that through the COVID experience. Some of you know that now through this current geopolitical situation we're in. And we know from resource scarcity data, things are only going to get worse. So it's important to prepare early on. And making the most of digital tools, it's this blending of digital and environment where we're going to see the most innovation. And that's where the biggest support is going to be from the European Commission. So let's focus a little bit on digital product passports. This means essentially a digital mechanism for verifying all data, and that all data is correct across or through the entire value chain. So it's about information requirements. And so that will be a kind of, I don't know if when you buy a washing machine or a fridge or something like that, you can see the grading from A to E, I think A to E plus or A plus plus plus. It's that kind of idea that anybody can see at a glance how your product, whatever you make, how it can be classified and how well it's doing in terms of repairability, in terms of emissions impact, and the other main criteria. So this is something that you'll all have to be responsible for, while governments will set the criteria, or the EU will, and that will be then transposed into national legislation. It's up to all of those manufacturers to keep hold of that data as the material goes through the supply chain to final use. There's a new consumer right to information on durability and repairability. And when I say consumer, I also mean customer. I also mean authorities, municipalities, and governments who procure huge products. And these two will have to meet the criteria for durability and have information attached to that, and also have information on repairs and updates. So this idea of repairability, of designing for reducing waste, comes through time and time again. So another area which I think could be interesting to just focus on a little bit is the unfair commercial practices. Obviously, there's already EU legislation in this area, but they're going to update this and making some quite, this is a proposal out of the Commission, but some quite strong and challenging, possibly, conditions for manufacturers. So just look at the photos. So traders cannot mislead consumers on product, environmental, social impact, as well as durability and repairability. So independently verified information that you will be responsible for attached to all of the materials as they move through the supply chain. New practices considered misleading are environmental claims related to future environmental performance without clear, objective and verifiable commitments and targets. And the newly banned unfair commercial practices include, and we know we've all seen these, so no information on durability or on information that actually on features that limit durability. We've all had our iPhone or whatever, things that run out before they're supposed to, and we're just not sure why. These generic, vague environmental claims, eco-friendly, environmental friendly, now that's going to have to be backed up by independent data, and they will be no longer allowed if there's no data supporting that. So making an environmental claim about a product when it's only that one small aspect, say it's a sustainable set of transport, mobility options, when it's just related to the tires, for example. Making a claim, displaying a label, which is not based on independent information. So up until now, that information has been hardly gathered. When it is gathered, it hasn't been subject to independent verification. So while manufacturers have to be responsible for having and for holding and for measuring, that data will have to be independently verified. Otherwise, it won't allow to be used in claims and product claims. And finally, not informing on the limited functionality. So, for example, if spare parts are provided by a different manufacturer, and then there's a limited life attached to those products, then that won't be allowed anymore. So there's a lot that's going on there. There's a lot to look out for. And this slide is just to say that more is on its way. And I won't get into more detail at this point. I just want to maybe end with this before I get into some recommendations. This is Executive Vice President for European Green Deal, Frans Timmermans. It's time to end the model of take, make, break and throw away that's so harmful to our planet, our health and our economy. It's just not sustainable. We've known that for a while, but now the regulation is coming which will prevent this happening. And only those sustainable products the most will be sold in Europe. So that's a challenge for you all to think, what are the most sustainable products and how can you make your products even more sustainable? Because those are the ones that will be safe in this newly regulated world. So just to round up in the interest of time, so we've got some time for questions as well. How can manufacturers stay resilient? How can you mitigate the disruption caused by sustainability? And how can you trigger further improvements in business models? So first recommendation, think about low carbon sustainable sourcing models. You need to have those in place. Every company will need to have models that reflect a drive to low carbon, low emissions as part of business, a standard part of business strategy, and sustainable sourcing model, meaning according to those criteria which are about to be set. The second is offer sustainable options. And I'm sorry about the text jumping around. Offer sustainable options. Offer customers and consumers a choice of sustainable options. It won't be enough to offer the standard products you're offering right now. You need to always go further because the tension will be to go further and further in terms of criteria and in terms of ambition. So assess where your products and services stand versus your the next best alternatives across these key criteria, especially material choices and reusability, and prepare for external uncertainty because as I said before, we know with this geopolitics, we cannot know, and there are risks attached to sourcing of raw materials. I've got 4. Now, the third one is recommendation is to commit to provide more sustainable products with consumer use footprint information, ensure sustainable sourcing with net zero, data-driven circular procurement, and get back to this eco-design. Get back to this circularity idea. Get back to the idea that everything that you produce is you're responsible for how it's used if it's end of life. So you need to weave back in that end of life of those materials back into the production cycle. And finally, take ownership. This is be ambitious, aim for net zero, aim for full circularity and net zero, because if it doesn't come this year, it's going to come in the next couple of years. Take ownership of all the social and environmental impacts created by your business model. create efficiencies, improve circularity, reduce your environmental footprint, and I guess the final message is partner with others, which you're doing today by joining this great event. I'm looking forward to your questions, and so I'm going to wrap for now, so we've got time for that. Thank you. See you now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jo, for sharing all your insights and knowledge. So then look into a few questions. And as we said, we're happy to, if you have any to share in the comments field, if you like. So as you showed in the overview for the European Green Deal, EU has the ambition to mobilize the industry for a clean and circular economy, as they call it. And you also emphasize the need for a circular economy for several reasons. And the European Commission admits that as it is now, it's challenging for a circular business model to take off and expand as the economy is driven today, and they'd like to see more investments being made and incentives to drive the circular business models. So do we see so far any upcoming regulatory pushes connected to circular business models, or how do you think they will be handling this going forward?
Well, to answer your question, I think it's a wider, it covers a wider actually topic than we were just, the regulation that I was just talking about in terms of circularity and low carbon. This is about how companies are defined as totally sustainable. And how is that being defined? That's through the taxonomy model. It's something called a taxonomy model at European level. And that in the recent proposal, which came out in February to do with corporate responsibility, it's called corporate due diligence proposals. There is a level of taxonomy defined, and there's also a level of taxonomy defined in the sustainable finance package. And all of that means is that there is coherence. There's going to be regulatory coherence in the Brussels bubble. It's a complicated area to figure out exactly what's sustainable and what's not. How is a lot of sustainability compared to a low level of sustainability? And that's why actually there have been working groups working on this taxonomy, and that's the idea of actually defining the criteria for each material, literally, for steel, for aluminium. What are those criteria in terms of use, in terms of production? And all of that is going to be so there's going to be an interconnection between the regulation I just talked about, which are basically focused on circular economy. There's going to be an urgent regulation adopted so that those sectors like phones, like electrical goods, especially like high users of steel, aluminium, they're going to be kind of under some kind of new, quick and dirty like emergency rule, which is going to be introduced as a stopgap measure before the full regulations are introduced in 2 years' time. So those industries which are highly concerning for policymakers, which create an awful lot of waste, they're going to be subject to kind of the criteria pretty early on. But it's going to be, in a way, an evolution. So these next couple of years, some of these regulations, especially concerning greenhouse gas emissions, have already been set. But the circularity criteria for what you define as, if you think about every metal, every material in use, every product category, that's a huge amount of work for the regulators in Brussels. And so that's really how this fits together with in the broader picture as you asked.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So then another question. So, you have consulted several clients within the manufacturing industry with their sustainability agendas. Could you give any examples of these and the challenges they have faced and how this affected their daily business? It must have affected them quite a lot, but if you just can pick and choose a few examples.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge always when you come to thinking of this complex area, like what is sustainability? And we always used to think that, well, sustainability is something that you add on. You do your business, and then you kind of tinker around with the edge and say, okay, we need to make it a little bit green, so we add on a green claim, it's a kind of PR role. Then it became a CSR role, and now it's at the heart of the business. And so for the companies I've consulted with in different sectors, and maybe I can give just a couple of examples. One is packaging, where the goal is to clearly, as part of low carbon ambition for regulators, is to reduce the level of plastic content. So that's from the fossil fuel, because it's a derivative from the oil and gas, from the fossil fuel sector, which policymakers now are trying to shift in sustainable investment out of that. I mean, interestingly, just as on the last question, there was a whole big debate of whether nuclear should be considered as a sustainable industry or not. It actually managed to scrape through. So oil, gas, and coal are considered not sustainable for the investment purposes and taxonomy. And now a nuclear is considered as that. So there are certain, if you think about materials from their origins, this is where policymakers have really got their minds focused. It's like, how do we as policymakers reduce the amount of plastic in the sector, in packaging, or in every sector, frankly? And so for the packaging industry, the challenge was how to reduce waste and also how to reduce plastics, how to reduce the kind of the impact of the materials used, how to shift to low carbon low carbon circular economy. And blending those two has always been a challenge for policymakers. A lot of policymakers are focused on how to reduce climate impact, which is reducing greenhouse gases, and a whole other set of policymakers are focused on reducing rubbish or reducing waste. And so if you try and intersect those two, actually what the business needs to do is to really get a lot of metric people first on board, is to figure out what is this data. And often they don't have the data themselves, so they have to go up or down the supply chain to figure out what is this data and what is this material impact if we really reduce this, if we shift out of plastics altogether, what does that mean for the other materials? And can we really assure our audiences and our customers that we can actually collect all of that material at the end of the day if it's made of a different type of material? Does that make it easier or does it make it more complicated? So I think you want to get the team in place and ask the right questions. It's like, how do we figure this out? Because it's not easy. It's a huge challenge. It's not easy as saying we just want to buy a ton of aluminium and a load of rubber and we want to stick it together and make it into a lift. And you can't do that anymore. That's not going to work that way anymore because you have to understand the material impact of each of those products and how they're going to be used at the end of their life cycle. So how it works in practice is understanding the problem. Actually, you need to understand the problem and you need to and it's what's been interesting with all the companies, the big companies I've worked with in this area. One is on packaging, another is textiles, another is aviation, making planes. All of them actually come up with the same methodology to try and address the problem because it's complicated. It's massively complicated, even for all of those people who know how. And you put all of the engineers in the room and they figure it out in weeks and years probably. We don't have time. So they all rely on digital tools and they all rely on collaboration to be able to figure out how they can actually reduce impacts in terms of circularity and in terms of low carbon. So I'd say that's really what all of them have in common is actually collaborate. And that's so unusual because normally companies compete, right? It's not so normal for companies in the same sector to get together and say, actually, we don't understand how that works. Or for a plane company to get together with the steel manufacturers or the glass fiber companies saying, how do we make this happen? So up and down the supply chain, there are all kinds of amazing collaborations which are happening. But it's the only way because nobody can figure out this complexity on their own.